Come, Nerevar, come. In today's sermon, I will be reading books that spout the absolute and unbiased truth about races and creatures that inhabit Tamriel. By sharing this knowledge with you, I hope to make you a much more informed citizen of Tamriel. If at the end of the sermon you are enlightened by me, a god, write on the parchment down below, "I am enlightened, Lord Dagoth." Without further delay, let us begin the most critical readings in the history of Tamriel. Orcs, The Vermin Among Us by Absalon Sorek, a pamphlet criticizing the Orcs and their membership in the Daggerfall Covenant. They lair in holes, they breed in huge numbers and smell of rotted meat. I speak not of skeevers, gentle reader, but of Orcs, the threat on the horizon, the unrelenting horde. But Sorek, I hear you saying, are they not our allies now? It's good that you want to believe in the leadership of King Emmerich. It's good that you want to believe in this covenant that now binds us to the beastmen of Orsinium. But in truth, your belief is foolish. Your trust in the king is misplaced, for these subhumans have a cruel and vicious cunning. Like a hunting wolf pack, the Orcs lie still in the tall grass. They wait for us to let down our guard. Even great men like His Majesty can be misled by this simple tactic. They now walk among us. They serve in the honored Lion Guard. They take work as sellswords, protecting our wealthiest merchants. They infiltrate our temples as bodyguards for holy men. Gentle reader, do you not see? Can't you see how every luxury we give these animals only encourages them? Every opportunity is just another opening in our armor for their rough-hewn blades to pierce. With their unnatural strength, they take up work that should be borne by Breton shoulders. The thickness of their stinking hides gives them a defense that no Redguard man can stand against. In cities across Covenant lands, stories grow of Orcs defiling our women and siring unnatural half-breeds. How long will you let this stand, reader? How long will you bend a knee to these filthy animals? I say no more. Join with like-minded people in your village today and rise up against these beasts, these scum, these Orcs. Corruption of the Blood by a true son of Aldmeris, a bigoted essay chastising the various races of elves. For millennia, we Altmer have safeguarded a divine legacy. We are all that remains of old Elnofe. We were entrusted by the Atada to preserve what they sacrificed so much to create. Those who have remained true to our traditions have kept their heritage pure and our civilization unspoiled. Those who have strayed from the path the Aldmer laid out for us, on the other hand, have been debased. They have become degenerates, unrecognizable from the divines that created them. Those who would call themselves Mer beyond these sacred isles are nothing but the twisted remains of the Aldmer. When you look into the ruddy eyes of a dark elf, do you see anything of yourself there? Of course not. All you see are the ashes of something greater, utterly destroyed by the false prophet Veleth and shaped into repugnant shadows by the Daedra he served. When you see the hideous malformed Orcs, do you see a creation of the Aedra? No, what you see is only the feculence of Boethia, leaving so loathsome that they had to sculpt their own dung god from filth to give their existence any meaning. But it is not just these pitiable wretches we must learn from, for it is not only those who are foolish enough to be seduced by the Daedra who threaten to warp our way of life. Look upon the wood elf and see how even the misguided worship of the divines can pervert our lineage. There is a difference between appreciating the forest and becoming a beast. Now, these wayward cousins are barely more than savage barbarians who devour their own kin. I am grateful none of the first folk remain to see how corrupted their perfection has become. The lesson is clear. To stray even slightly from the ways of our ancestors will have dire consequences. Knowing that, can you acquiesce to throwing open the gates and welcoming corruption into these holy lands with a smile? The unforeseen queen is the harbinger of our destruction. We must resist her heresy. Nerevar, this is just the ramblings of an Altmer lunatic. While I agree with most of this, I do think that the Altmer are the ones who strayed away. Dunmer are the true Mer. If you are enjoying these readings and sermon, please raise your thumbs, subscribe to my sermons, and write on the parchment down below. The Pig Children by Tistan Bane discusses the history of the Orcish threat in the Iliac Bay. No one, not the oldest dark elf of Mount Dagoth Ur or the ancient sage of solitude himself, can recall a time when the orc did not ravage our fair Tamriel. Whatever foul and pestilent daedra of Oblivion conjured them up could scarcely have created a more constant threat to the well-being of the civilized races of Tamriel than the obnoxious orc. Orcs are thankfully easy to recognize from other humanoids by their size, commonly 40 pertons in height and 15,000 engids in weight, their brutal pig-like features, and their stench. They are consistently belligerent, morally grotesque, intellectually moronic, and unclean. By all rights, the civilized races of Tamriel should have been able to purge the land of their blight eras ago, but their ferocity, animal cunning, and curious tribal loyalty have made them inevitable as leeches in a stagnant pool. Tales of Orcish barbarity precede written record. When Jastiaga wrote of the Order of Diagnas joining the armies of Daggerfall and Sentinel to hold at bay the wicked Orcs in their foul Orsinium fastness, and burn aught in cleansing flame in 1 950, she assumed that any reader would be aware of the savagery of the Orcs. When the siege was completed 30 years later, after the death of many heroes including Gaiden Shinji, and the destruction of Orsinium scattered the Orcish survivors throughout the Wrothagrian mountains, she further wrote, "The free peoples rejoiced for that their ancient fell enemy was dispersed into diverse parts." Obviously, the Orcs had been terrorizing the region of the Iliac Bay, at least since the early years of the First Era. The Ogres of Wrothagr, a continuing treatise by Sirin Tille, an addendum to a treatise on the ogres that inhabit Wrothagr. In my previous studies of the Ogres of Tamriel, I discuss ogres, their behavior, and their rudimentary intelligence in some detail. That work, Ogres: A Summary, should contain sufficient information for those interested in learning more about the dumb brutes, but I write this addendum in an effort to clear up some misconceptions I've heard since traveling to Wrothagr. First, do not let anyone tell you that these beasts have any sort of societal structure. As with other animals, stronger ogres lead weaker ogres by proving their dominance. Simple, uncomplicated. Second, ogres cannot work magic. There have been reports of ogre shamans, but these are the gross exaggerations of the misinformed. Some few ogres may have capabilities that are hard to explain, but we shall see they are no more complicated than a spider's ability to spin a web. Finally, unlike the graceful Sonche or the useful Gar, these beasts have no redeeming qualities. They cannot be trained, taught, or domesticated. It would be better to treat them as we would any other natural hazard and work around them, or remove them from our proximity. There is no better response. Argonians Among Us by Sil Rothriel, an overview of the Argonian race from a Dunmer's perspective. Argonians are scaled and of limited intelligence, and they are part of our everyday lives. In Morrowind and its surrounding regions, they're seen in every city and every town. They bring us our meals, they dress our children, but who are they really? Argonians originate from the region known as the Black Marsh. A water-soaked and depressing land, it reeks of swamp gas and teems with insects. In their native land, the Argonians squat in fetid pools and worship primitive tribal gods. Their folk magics and simple tribal armies have never proven an adequate defense against men or mer of stout heart. The swamp was first pacified by the Cyrodiilic army in First Era 2811. Those cruel and capricious men only entered the region to end the rule of a human bandit king. After the gauntleted hand of civilization came to the Argonians, their home served primarily as a prison state. The unthinking brutes of Cyrodiil callously released their most violent and unhinged criminals into the marsh. Almost 600 years ago, dark elves entered the lives of this scaly servant race. As the Second Era dawned, we began working with the Argonians in earnest. Whole tribes were evacuated to the safety and dry climates of Vardenfell, Stonefalls, and Deshan. We offered them appropriate foodstuffs and taught them the ways of civilized culture. We fashioned garments to hide their more shameful features and sent them into the world so they could learn and serve in new environs. In return for our generosity, we've asked so little of the Argonians. And yet not all denizens of that fetid place feel true appreciation. Indeed, our time of close collaboration came to an end just a few years ago. A horrific disease known as the Knahaten flu, brewed in the steamy depths of the marsh, spread across the region. Rumored to be the product of an Argonian tribal shaman, the plague struck all without reptilian ancestry, slaying uncounted numbers. Most tragically, other races began to fear the Argonians as spreaders of the plague. Our efforts to send Argonians on journeys of discovery were rebuffed at every turn. Today, of course, Argonians stand side by side with us in the Ebonheart Pact. Once they were merely our servants, but now we have elevated this simple reptilian stock. They are strong, proud contributors to our military alliance and cared-for members of our households. The Argonians Among Us enrich our lives. A Hunter's Journey, 6. Fauns by Viola Fultinius, professional hunter. A hunter's stories about the fauns of High Isle. I've loosed arrows in every forest from Solitude to Lilmuth. I've carved the hide off a mother Wamasu and pried the tusks from a gray bull mammoth. I've gutted, skinned, and stuffed my way all across Tamriel. But until recently, there was one thing I hadn't done. I'd never hunted a faun. I'd heard tales, sure. Stories about some primitive deer people scampering around on an island in the Eltheric. Now most times I hear a tale like that and just laugh in my ale. But then I did a bit of research and found truth in these frontier tales. Naturally, I snatched up my knife and longbow, secured passage on a ship, and sailed westward. Some folk might read this and call hunting fauns murder. These fauns are people, right? Well, it's not that simple. Is a goblin a person? Is an ogre a person? They're clever enough to put on a pair of trousers, I'll give you that. But if those beasts are people, then the world we live in is full of murderers. Fact is, goblins are vicious little creatures. Ogres are lumbering brutes, and fauns aren't much better. Don't believe me? Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, a water carrier named Tarvar Gomberville dipped his bucket in Loch Abhain, not far from Yffrey's cauldron. He'd barely filled his bucket when a pair of fauns burst out of the undergrowth, gibbering like wild animals. They tossed a vine rope around Tarvar, tied him up tight, then strung him up on a tree by his ankles. That was just the beginning. Pretty soon, they started stuffing his mouth full of garlic cloves, baying their animal laughs. Then they slathered him with honey and whacked a hornet's nest off a nearby tree. Poor Tarvar got stung 50 times or more. His family found him the next day, alive, but just barely. Now that's just one tale related to the acts of these supposed people. I know plenty more that end far worse than this. So if you mean to shed any tears on a faun's account, just remember that poor bastard in his bucket. If you want to spare the people of High Isle a similar fate, I'll see you on the hunt. Dunmer of Skyrim by Othel Saris. A proclamation of Dunmer supremacy in eastern Skyrim. Dunmer, that is our name. Yet you deny us even this courtesy. You, the white-skinned, jaundice-haired apes of this gods-forsaken frozen wilderness. To you Nords, we are the Grey Ones, the ashen-skinned, the dark elves of Morrowind who have as much place in your land as an infection in an open wound. Oh yes, we have read your great cultural work, Nords of Skyrim, in which you extol the many virtues of your people and province, and invite any visitors to come experience your homeland for themselves. Well, come we did, Nords, and the reception was less than was promised, but exactly what we expected. So I, Atal Saris, Dunmer, and immigrant to Skyrim, have decided to answer your beloved book with a work of my own. And let all who read it know that Nords are not the only race to reside in this cold and inhospitable realm. For we Dark Elves have come, and little by little shall claim Skyrim as our own. But where, you may ask, have we taken up residence? Why, none other than the ancient city of Windhelm, once the capital of the First Empire. Yes, Nords, in the shadow of your own Palace of the Kings, where the Nord hero Ysgramor once held court, we now thrive. Oh yes, your beloved 500 companions may have driven our ancestors from Skyrim, but that was then. This is now. Indeed, one might be surprised as to just how well we've settled into Windhelm. The district once known as the Snow Quarter is thus named no more. Now they call it the Grey Quarter, for such is the reality of the Dunmer occupation. The district is now populated entirely by my kind, a victory not lost on its residents. Oh, but the peaceful occupation goes even further. Thirsty? You'll find no Nord mead hall in the Grey Quarter, but the spirits flow well enough in the new Gnesis Corner Club. Seeking a respected family? You'll find no grey manes within these walls, but perhaps you'd like to pay a visit to the home of Balin Hlalu, descendant of one of the most noble houses in all of Morrowind. Ah, but no, you Nords don't come to the Grey Quarter, do you? You fear our streets as you fear our skin. So now, children of Skyrim, you have the truth of it. You may call this province home, but you can no sooner claim to own it than a cow can claim to own its master's field. You are just another breed of domestic animal, grazing stupidly while higher beings plot your slaughter. Wait, who let you in, you Nord Enwa? What are you doing, you fool?
I am taking over this one, Dark Elf. Scourge of the Grey Quarter be Frilgith Horsebreaker. A complaint on the presence and behavior of the growing Dunmer population of Skyrim. The tragedies befalling Morrowind do bring forth pity from even the stoutest Nordic heart. The Dark Elves deserve our condolences, but thus far they do not show themselves deserving of the simplest acts of charity. There are very different approaches to how to deal with the imminent problem of Morrowind, and I offer two options as seen in practice in Skyrim. One should serve as an exemplar, the other a cautionary tale. Consider Riften, which shares a border with the ruined province. A number of the Dark Elves have made their homes there, but they are expected to earn their livelihoods as is any other citizen of the great city. They ply trades as merchants, work in the temple, and serve in the keep. Honest labor, to be admired from a race that was so recently in such dire straits as to even warrant this discussion. Today, the city still has its share of problems, but they are not traceable to any influx of outsiders in their presence. In short, the Dark Elves have properly assimilated themselves into the Skyrim way of life, to be expected from any newcomer to these lands. For an alternative approach, we only have to look at the once proud city of Windhelm to see what can happen when our arms are cast too wide open in welcome. To think that the city of Ysgramor, whose very name was made in driving out the elves from our sacred home, would open itself as a welcome destination for any refugee from the smoking sulfur is a disgrace to the very idea of being a Nord. And what has become of this? Predictably, the lazy, discontented rabble has descended into squalor in an area now delicately referred to as the Grey Quarter of the city. They were not expected to contribute, and so have not. That they attempt to make over a proud Nord city into a little pocket of Morrowind is insulting enough. But the amount of unrest they have provoked even within the proper city walls should give any other Jarl reason to fear. The Nords I talk to in the city speak of constant strife and crime coming from the Grey Quarter, with no respite in sight. The city guard barely patrol there, leaving the Dark Elves to mete out whatever passes for justice in their native customs. The respectable families of the city, the cruel seas and shatter shields, speak with an almost parental affection of the Argonians in their employ. But the Dark Elves have made no effort to ingratiate or assimilate themselves to the proper city dwellers. There is cause for optimism, though, as Jarl Ulfric is not nearly so tolerant of these substandard beings as his fathers were. Indeed, the soft hand of Hogue can be seen in the city's Husic Argonian population as well. The fishmen at least have learned how to best contribute to their new home. They have proven themselves as models, toiling at the docks with utmost efficiency and bright smiles. It would do the Dark Elves well to pay heed to their scaly cousins. I would expect in due course that they will find themselves either contributing more directly or once again wandering the land in search of roof and warmth.
Wait, I have a few things to read from the Cloud District. I don't get to read very often, but there are documents that only I can read in earnest. On our enemies. A highly prejudiced Dagoth Covenant pamphlet stereotyping various races. The peoples of the Dagoth Covenant are a strong and diverse group. It is our differences that help us be strong. We complement each other. This is not true of the other races of Tamriel. The Elves. The High Elves who rule over the lesser races in the Aldmeri Dominion are without a doubt the most arrogant of the Elf races, which is saying quite a bit. High Elves believe that they are the direct descendants of the Aedra. They rule over the Wood Elves and Khajiit, while giving them token positions within the ruling hierarchy to keep them content. Rumors of harsh punishments for disobedience cannot be confirmed, as any dissidents quickly disappear. The Wood Elves are a barbaric people who are willing to submit to High Elf rule as long as their practices of cannibalism are allowed to continue. They eat their enemies, and even one another. They worship the trees of Valenwood, refusing to cut them down or harm the animals that live there. Who does things like that? The Dark Elves of Morrowind are almost as bad as the High Elves. The tribunal rulers of the Dark Elves have convinced their people that they are living gods, possessing great powers and immortality. These old wizards openly imitate what was called the Good Daedra as part of their Dark Elf ancestral worship. The Beast Races. The Khajiit are the cat people of elsewhere. Many rumors exist about the Khajiit, and they are certainly all true. The Khajiit are a society of thieves and addicts. Most spend their time consuming vast quantities of the addictive substance distilled from moon sugar. Thievery is second nature to these cats, as stealing often supports their addictions. Argonians are the lizard folk of the Black Marsh. Little is known about their culture, save for a few rumors and lots of hearsay. It is known that they believe they originate from the trees that grow in Black Marsh. The environment of the marsh has given the Argonians a resistance to the toxic substances found there. The society of Black Marsh is primitive by the standards of the other races. Humans. The Nords are the hardened folk of the north. Hailing from Skyrim, these brutes live for war and conquest. When not fighting others, the Nords fight among themselves. The Nords are not a very bright people. It seems that the thin air in Skyrim has led to a stunting of the mental capacity of the Nords. The Cyrodiils are a cunning and ruthless people. The central location of Cyrodiil has given them contact with all the races of Tamriel and made them fine traders and diplomats. It has also made them very shrewd, with silver tongues and cheating ways. They have a sense of entitlement to rule. Of all the enemies of the Daggerfall Covenant, it is the people of Cyrodiil that are the most dangerous. Regarding the Ebonheart Pact, by Eikentar of Shimmerine, Sapiarch of Indoctrination. Condemnation against the Dunmer and their allegiance to the Ebonheart Pact. Our cousins the Dark Elves have been duly punished for the betrayal of their ancestry, because they have embraced, and then attempted to emulate, the Daedra. A curse has disfigured their bodies and blasted their land. That lesson was apparently insufficient, for they have now left the boundaries of their cursed domain, and seek to infect the rest of the mainland with their heresies. The trio of wily demon spawn who rule them have duped the simple Nords and the slave lizard Argonians into joining this mad escapade. To allow the Ebonheart Pact to rule in Cyrodiil would be just as foolish as to leave the Empire to one or another of the tribes of men. The Tribunal is ultimately an even greater danger to Nirn than the heedless and impetuous human nations. They must be driven back into their haunted corner of the continent, with their power broken forever.
Honor the sixth house and the tribe unmourned by raising your thumb, subscribing to my sermons, and writing on the parchment down below. Thank you to all Sixth House members and patrons for funding the operation of the Sixth House across Tamriel. I would like to thank the adoring fan Connor Runda and the current Sharmat Tanya Davis for your unwavering loyalty during these less productive times.